A swarm of bees that needed a new place to live settled under this table, and I was called to remove them. So I gave the bees a new hive and I started to move them in. When these bees left their old hive, they took their queen and as much food as their stomachs could hold, but they left everything else behind. That meant that there was no honeycomb, food, or baby bees here, and I could just scoop these bees up with my hands. These bees were very gentle, mostly because they didn't have a hive to protect, but they should have had a queen. So with every handful of bees I scooped, I was searching for the queen. It wasn't too long before I found her hiding under the table, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe and I put her in the new hive. I needed to get all of the bees into the new hive as quickly as possible so they wouldn't try to swarm again. So I just kept scooping handful after handful of bees into the hive. But there were still a lot of bees on the picnic table who didn't seem to know where to go. So I gave them a little bit of smoke to help them move along. The smoke does not harm the bees, they just move away from it like we do. So I used my smoker to herd the colony into the new hive. Then all of a sudden, some of the bees started to recognize the hive as their new home. They began sending signals to the other bees to tell them where to go. And all of the bees started to march down the leg of the table and into the new hive. I waited while the bees moved into their new hive, then I closed it up, I loaded it into my truck, and it was another great day of saving the bees. I got a call to remove a colony of bees from this backyard compost bin, and here's how I did it. First, I started to carefully remove the comb structure of the hive. I fit the pieces of comb that had baby bees and the bees' food into wooden frames. Next, it was time to start scooping bees into the new hive. I always wear protective equipment when I need to, but since I work with bees almost every day, I've learned to read their behavior and could tell that these bees, like most honeybees, were very gentle and would not try to sting me. So I kept removing comb and removing bees from the bin, all while looking for the queen bee. After I removed most of the bees, I saw the queen crawling up the side of the bin, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe. She's the largest bee in the colony, which makes her a little easier to find. There she is. I put the queen in the new hive and all the other bees started to follow her in. I had to get a bigger hive because there were so many bees, but after most of them went in the hive, I closed it up and carried it back to my truck, and it was another great day of saving the bees. A small swarm of bees had gathered on this tennis court and I was called to remove them. But once I got there, I realized this colony was in more trouble than it seemed. Their queen was dead, and because the bees were so loyal to their queen, they refused to leave her behind. They were still trying to attend to her and take care of her little bee body. So I put the queen's body in the new hive. It took the bees a few minutes to realize she had moved, but once they found her, they rushed to her and started to care for her in the new hive. So I waited for all the bees to get into their new hive, but since this colony was so small already, they needed more than a new queen to survive. They needed to join a new colony. So once I got the bees home, I put them in a standard beehive box, but I couldn't just put them with another colony and a new queen right away, or that could cause confusion, chaos, and fighting among the bees. So I put a layer of newspaper between them. The newspaper would keep the colony safe and separated while the bees got used to each other's scents. So I closed up the hive. When I checked on the bees a few days later, the bees had chewed through the newspaper and the two colonies had merged together to become one, and it was another great day of saving the bees. A swarm of bees settled under this umbrella and I was called to remove them. So I started scooping bees off the umbrella and putting them into a hive. When bees are in swarms like this, it means they're looking for a new place to live. They tend to be very docile since they don't have any resources to defend. They don't have a hive, food, or baby bees to protect, but they should have a queen. So with every handful of bees I scooped, I spent time searching for the queen. I repeated this process over and over again. By the time I removed most of the bees, I still had not seen the queen, and I realized this was an unusual case of a queenless swarm. This colony would not survive without a queen, but luckily I had an extra one on me I could give them. As soon as I gave the queen to the colony, they rushed to meet her. If they didn't accept her, they would try to kill her. If they did accept her, they would release her from the box by chewing through the piece of candy that stops up one end. As soon as the bees in the hive met the new queen, they began sending signals to the other bees telling them to move off the umbrella and into the box. So I just waited in the swarm of bees as the colony moved into their new home. After about 15 minutes, most of the bees were with their colony, so I checked on the queen and saw that the bees were starting to accept her. I waited a while longer for the bees to get in their new hive, then I loaded them into my truck and drove home. I put the bees in my apiary so they could continue the important work they do in a place that's safer for them and for people, and it was another great day of saving the bees. I woke up one morning and my truck was covered with more bees than usual, so I ran outside in my pajamas to see what was going on. A swarm of bees that I caught the night before was leaving their hive and swarming again. I tried to offer their new hive back to them, but they weren't moving in very quickly, which told me that they wanted to go somewhere else. It was a race between me and the bees. I had to find the queen before the bees found a place to fly off to. After a few minutes, I found her. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, but before I could put her in the new hive, I had bees swarming to her in my hand. As soon as I put the queen in the hive, the bees began to go right in. I still had some bees on my hand who weren't leaving because they could still smell their queen on me. So I shook them off so they could find her. Within minutes, the entire colony was rushing to get back into their new hive. You can see how fast they were moving and how the queen was covered in bees. I waited for all the bees to get into their hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees in my pajamas. I got a call to remove bees from one of the weirdest places ever, this toilet. The bees had been living in the tank of this toilet for years, and they filled the entire space with comb and had no room left to grow. So I got to work removing the hive. Everything I removed from the original hive was safe for the bees to have in their new home. Here's what the comb looked like. This piece had honey at the top, pollen below, and brood on the bottom. I spent a lot of time carefully removing each piece of comb. This was a happy and healthy colony of honeybees, and they were not stinging me at all. After I removed all of the comb, the toilet was still full of bees, which told me the queen was in there. Suddenly, I saw her crawling up the side of the tank. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and I placed her in the new hive. Then I made a little bee bridge that led straight to the queen so the bees could easily get to their new hive. It worked, and the bees marched right in. After the bees started to recognize the bee box as their new home, I closed up the hive, I waited for the colony to move into the box, then we drove home, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees had been living in this backyard shed for at least 2 years. The landlord wanted to call an exterminator, but the family who lived here wanted to save the bees, so they called me. When I lifted up the floor, I found a huge hive full of gentle bees. The hive was so big I had to remove another section of floor to access the entire thing. Then I started removing the hive. Whatever I removed from the original hive went right into the new one so the bees would have everything they need to survive. After I removed all of the comb, I started scooping bees into the new hive. As soon as I put the bees by the new hive, they marched right in. Then a stream of bees began running out from under the floor into the new hive. So I waited and watched to see if I could spot the queen bee in the crowd. After about 15 minutes, she appeared, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe. Once the queen was in the new hive, some bees began sending signals to help the other bees find their way home. I left the hive overnight, and by the next day, the entire colony was in their new home, and it was another great day of saving the bees.